Decoding the Indian strategy, Indo-Pacific strategy of India. As we all know, there has been an upsurge in the global attention on the region in the last few years in both geo-economic and geostrategic terms. To begin with, the Indo-Pacific maritime space is central to global commerce, carrying an estimated 65% of world trade and contributing 60% of global GDP. Geopolitically, the region has been witnessing China's growing belligerence, which in turn has helped tie together the varying perceptions and priorities of the stakeholders in the region and beyond. India, located at the heart of the Indian Ocean region and sharing a 3,488-kilometer land border with China, is presented with both opportunities and challenges that could be pivotal to the geopolitical affairs in the region. The geostrategic events currently unfolding in the Indo-Pacific region bears a resemblance to the political environment in which ancient Indian strategic thought in Kautilya's Arthashastra took shape. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's characterization of the region as representing the emergence of multipolarity and the benefits of rebalancing, quote unquote, is starkly similar to how Arthashastra describes the political landscape of the ancient Mahajanapada region. Mine has been just a sketchy account of the dynamics of the region. I have, quite simplistically, tried to just contextualize Professor Singh's lecture to the best of my ability and understanding. I know, and of course, all of us know, that there is much more complexity and anxious rivalry characterizing the entire area than what is suggested prima facie from my introduction. All the students, please listen to Sir intently and ask brief and meaningful questions. We have Dr. Vaishali Raghuvanshi of our department as the discussant for today. She will help you all in streamlining your questions, but let's remember, all of us, to be brief and precise in asking questions. So, over to Professor Swaran Singh. I welcome him once again, and I invite him to take hold of the platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shubha Rao. I think, as usual, I will request participants to make sure their mics are mute, and if they can, if their videos can be on. Right now, it seems some mics are on and videos are off. Let us reverse it. Let us make sure that participants' audios are off. And if they can, please switch on your videos so that I can see who are the people I'm speaking to. It feels nice that. Let me also say it's a great pleasure and honor to reconnect with my very dear colleague and a friend, Professor Shubha Rao. We had opportunities of being together on some selection committees before. And of course, she heads today the most prestigious political science department at Banaras Hindu University. Before we went into pandemic, I've had some opportunities to be in Banaras Hindu University, which is a lovely campus. I have always enjoyed morning walks in the campus there. So it's nice to at least virtually reconnect. And I'm happy to see that some of you, Soumya, Dr. Vaishali, Raghuvanshi, and I also see Rajneesh Kumar Pandey. Some of you are now visible to me, so I can see that Krishna Mohan has also joined us. Ritesh Kumar, thank you. So, you know, I'm an old-fashioned teacher, so it feels good when you see your audience in front of you, and then you feel like saying few things. And I understand BHU faculty and students are as argumentative as JNU students are. So I intensely look forward to the second component, where you may have either certain opinions, you could contradict me. I'll most welcome that. And in case you have some questions, I'll try to answer that. But as the convention goes, I'll have to maybe outline, what I think of India's role, trying to decode if there is one Indo-Pacific strategy that India has developed over a period of time. And then, of course, I would love to see that we are in a second component of question answer session. First question to me, which is important before we decode India's strategy, is to decode what is Indo-Pacific, why are we discussing it, why has it suddenly become so central in international relations, foreign policy discourses. One simple driving factor very often is supposed to be that this is the region which is now the locomotive of global growth rates. About 60-65% of global growth rates before we went into pandemic were being generated in this region. And that is why the global focus shifting from 20th century obsession with national security, physical security, to now shifting to geoeconomics, prosperity, makes this region much more important for everyone else. That is a point number one, that is why this region is attracting countries from world over. You see now, we have had the United States to start with announcing their Indo-Pacific strategy way back in 2017. They've had 2 additional versions since the last one was announced by Joe Biden in this February. Likewise, we have had the Indo-Pacific strategies announced from France, from Britain, from Germany. I think from February we are listening. It is very much delayed now that Canada also is trying to announce its Indo-Pacific strategy. Of course, at the center of Indo-Pacific is ASEAN. So we also know that ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific was also announced some years ago. So how all major players in international system are not just engaging, but outlining for the rest of the world as to how they wish to engage, what they think of that region, and how they wish to make their own value addition in bringing prosperity, bringing openness, freedom, stability to this region. Second important point to understand is that when we start focusing on this region, which we call Indo-Pacific, we automatically begin to talk about global focus shifting from 20th century focus on North Atlantic. So we are shifting global focus from North Atlantic, which is where North Atlantic means only European countries and United States and Canada had come together to form North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And that undergirded United States 20th century global leadership, especially in the second half of 20th century. And it seems that the global history was North Atlantic history. The whole IR discourses were about nuclear deterrence, as if that is the only issue to be discussed. It's only, you see, last 3 to 4 decades that we now talk of non-traditional security. We talk of critical security studies. That obsession with physical security, nuclear weapons as currency of power is disappearing, and therefore shift physically from North Atlantic to Indo-Pacific. Reason is simple, because Indo-Pacific, as I mentioned, is becoming an economic driver. Third point is, within Indo-Pacific, we now have a country called China. Now, unlike earlier economic prosperities that happened, for example, in 1970s in Japan, in 1990s in Germany, Germany got united. It is now the strongest and most powerful economy in Europe. But because they were junior partners of United States, they continued to understand, outline, and manage international affairs as perceived by United States, which is where physical security was seen as most important. NATO was continuously seen as more important. So when Germany became an economic power, nobody said Germany is a superpower. When Japan became a great economic power, some of you remember the flying geese model, where it even helped create tiger economies in Southeast Asia. Nobody said Japan was a superpower. But when China begins to grow economically, now we are saying, oh, China is a superpower in the making. Why is that distinction? Because the earlier two economic powerhouses, Japan and Germany, were in tandem with the United States. Today, China is a competitor of United States. So it is not a junior partner of United States. In fact, United States sees China as the fundamental challenge to its international stature. Repeatedly, its Indo-Pacific strategies are saying China is trying to replace United States, at least in the Indo-Pacific, and gradually from around the world. I could give many examples if there are questions later. So that is the third point, that you now have an economic powerhouse, which is huge, but important it is that it is not bandwagoning United States, it is challenging United States. And therefore, it sees its influence driven by comprehensive national strength. And comprehensive national strength is not limited to only military power. Military power is a component. Now, national strength counts much more on other components, like economic power, like soft power. Joseph Nye has done a lot of work on soft power. India has enormous soft power around the world. So how that national power, driven by various components, now makes China a competitor, and China is redefining international institutions, international norms, international processes. All of you are aware of the Belt and Road Initiative. It is going around the world, almost one-sided investments in countries which are poor and starved of infrastructure, and they need that infrastructure. So that's a third point, that China is now being recognized as a superpower or superpower in the making. And Indo-Pacific, which is growing along with China. In fact, China's growth is not possible if the neighborhood growth does not happen. Most of the manufacturing in China is closely linked to neighboring countries of Indo-Pacific region. That is why we today talk of global supply chains being so China-centric. Let me give you an example. World has about 200 plus nations. China alone manufactures 30% of global output. Now imagine the power that China has. Out of 200 countries, one country called China is producing about 30% of goods. Next country, which is the largest producer in manufacturing sector, is United States. But United States produces only half of what China produces. The next to that, third largest is Japan, which is 1/4, 7% of the global output. To take India's own example, we produce only 3% of manufacturing sector of the world. So China is 10 times. And once you begin to recognize that economic component is an important component of national comprehensive strength, it makes China an important player. And indeed, I would even dare say that the whole conceptualization of Indo-Pacific is triggered by this unprecedented rise of China, which is closely linked to the rise of Indo-Pacific, because all of them are locomotives of global growth. And now prosperity is seen as an important component of national power, not just nuclear weapons. In fact, a small country like Ukraine had more nuclear weapons when it became independent from Soviet Union than China. So China is not a great nuclear weapon power. Russia is a nuclear weapon superpower, but Russia is a small economy now. Why don't we consider Russia as a big power anymore? Because it's only less than 2 trillion, $1.8 trillion economy. Compared to China claiming now 18 trillion, 10 times. United States is about 21 to 22 trillion dollar economy. India is about 2.6 trillion dollar economy. So size of economy in that sense makes China unusually powerful. And since China does not come out of what has been for last 350 years plus the Westphalian system driven by Greco-Roman ethics, Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence, one after another, European colonial powers, when they retreated and world started seeing decolonization, the successor state was again a European dominated state, United States. So the same ethos, same ethics, same traditions continued. Indeed, in 1990, when Soviet Union collapses, there's a big debate. Should the international processes, institutions, equations change now? Should NATO be disbanded? But that would have created enormous challenge to United States power at that time, because the old systems created after Second World War made United States such a powerful country, and now the competitor, Soviet Union, had collapsed. So it became sole surviving superpower. Therefore, in tandem with these European allies, they did not undertake the fundamental transformation of international system, which was required now, because world was no longer bipolar. World was now a fluid multipolar world. So they continued with the old medicine, as I often say, without redoing the diagnosis. And therefore, when you say, okay, take more tablets of the same thing, which has proven more or less ineffective, we continue to be in chaos. In fact, let me dare say, United States military, which is seen as symbol of its being superpower, has had one after another disasters since Second World War. Think of any intervention that American military has made since Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, all the way to Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. They have come out of those situations leaving bigger mess than existed when they went into that theater. So, simple reason, because they were giving dose of the same medicine which was already proving disineffective without redoing the diagnosis of the problem. That is where China becomes interesting, because China is not an Anglo-Saxon country. It's a scenic civilization. Their way of thinking, behaving is very different. And of course, the lineage with communism again reinforces that distinction from Anglo-Saxon world. And likewise, India. India is, of course, largely our elite is educated in Western countries, but nevertheless, all our elite have continued to be grounded in Indian tradition. Look at India's foreign policy. Your non-alignment was Madhyam Marg. Your Panchsheel was from Buddhism. So, discovery of India was explaining how India is located deeply in civilizational heritage of the country. So, China and India are grounded deeply civilizationally, and therefore they can never be junior partners of United States. China right now is seen as a competitor. United States is trying to co-opt India to compete with China, but they invariably get into problem. For example, you are seeing what is happening on Ukraine crisis. So to come back to the point I'm making, why Indo-Pacific is now relevant and we are discussing, is because you now have a country called China, which is changing the rules of the game, at least in its own periphery, which is where Indo-Pacific is located. China is the driver of growth for all these countries, and all these countries are drivers of growth for China. And they understand that their prosperity is closely linked to China's prosperity, and China's prosperity, vice versa, linked to these countries' prosperity. That is why you see, despite all the tensions on the border in last 2 years, India's trade with China has gone up. According to Chinese, last year it increased 43 or 44%, reaching $125 billion. Of course, it is largely one-sided. And that made United States the second largest trading partner of India. So that kind of prosperity linkages and redefining the rules, redefining the components of what constitutes national strength is what is creating trouble for United States, because then we start talking of what we say relative decline of the United States. So United States attempt here in creating this new geopolitical framework of Indo-Pacific is to ensure that just like it dominated in 20th century by keeping NATO together under its control, it can replicate something like this in Indo-Pacific and continue to be the superpower in 21st century as well. So it is trying to create certain kind of a club of nations here. But Indo-Pacific is far too diverse, linguistically, ethnically, civilizationally, culturally, religion-wise. It's not like European countries, which were largely Christian nations of a certain size, of a certain prosperity. Most of them were colonial powers. So the challenge United States faces now is how to create that club here. It is not going to be the same club as NATO. You would remember United States had tried that. When they created NATO, they also created CETO and CENTO for this region. They created Southeast Asia Treaty Organization and Central Treaty Organization, which was called Baghdad Pact. But both of them failed because these nations did not wish to behave the way United States wanted them to behave. They were not at home with what United States was prescribing. Therefore, United States shifted from NATO kind of alliances to what we call hub and spokes strategy for this region after Second World War. Meaning, you have a bilateral alliance partnership with one country like Japan, like South Korea, like Philippines, like Singapore, and that bilateral alliance in times of challenge will co-opt other local friendly countries. So hub and spokes. Now, the new experiments that United States is doing to create some kind of a club here, which will treat United States as their leader, and therefore United States for 21st century will also be the leader of the world because it is leader of the region, which is global growth locomotive. It is creating many things. Donald Trump, for example, revived something called Five Eyes Initiative. These Five Eyes were created during Second World War, but they were dormant, they were not very active. And then, of course, after collapse of Soviet Union, it had almost disappeared. Now, when China became a new challenge, this Five Eyes was created for European context, but now being recreated for Indo-Pacific context. These countries are Canada and United States from that part of Indo-Pacific, and of course, this part of Indo-Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. So 5 countries, meaning 5 eyes. Eyes for intelligence. This is a network of intelligence sharing. At that time, because India was from 2007 also being seen as part of quadrilateral security dialogue, there was a debate whether India would join the 5 eyes and it will become 6 eyes. India, of course, did not join because India does not believe in that way of behaving and conducting international relations. But India continued to be in Quad. For a long time, Quad was also being described as Asian NATO. India was clearly against it because Indian Prime Minister in Shangri-La dialogue speech of 2018, June 1st, had made a speech which even today is seen as the baseline of India's Indo-Pacific vision. And what he said there, many things, but 2 quick things. India would never like to see this region becoming militarized. Now go back to non-alignment, right? Steering clear from military alliances. So India said we will not, Prime Minister said we will not like to see this region getting militarized. Second, Vasudev Kutumbakam. Again, in that speech, he says we would not like to see this region becoming a club of certain limited number of countries, or all are welcome. So how civilizationally grounded Indian foreign policy has been made it impossible that we will be agreeing to things that United States would like to do. Some of you interested should see Mike Pompeo's speeches during various Quad meetings. He was really trying to create a kind of a military club, at least. But India stood its ground all the time. And ultimately, what happened? September last year, they shifted the military component out of Quad. And they created AUKUS. Australia, United Kingdom, and United States will share military technologies, especially submarines, and kind of deploy these submarines in Indo-Pacific to counter China's influence. they realized India would not allow that to happen in Quad, and therefore created a separate organization for that. In fact, it is interesting that UK is not a Indo-Pacific country, but it is member of that triangle, because United States sees Britain as a junior partner and reliable partner. And global Britain, the new policy that Britain has now after Brexit, they want to redefine their foreign policy, which is now called Global Britain. They got really interested to get this opportunity to come to Indo-Pacific. Now, more recently, if you remember, in Tokyo recently, when President Joe Biden came, he launched Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. India is very happy to join economic frameworks. So India is a very, very enthusiastic partner in Indo-Pacific framework. But Indo-Pacific framework is not the same as free trade agreements, because those are binding. And the largest free trade agreement is Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, which became effective from 1st of January this year, was concluded in 2019. India had walked out of that last minute. This was 16 nations largest FTA. Now it is 15 nations largest FTA. That is a free trade agreement that talks about reducing tariffs, talks about dispute settlement mechanisms, talks about providing market access. India is not agreeable on that. Therefore, India walked out of that. But Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is not free trade agreement. It is only a talk about creating systems which are going to be very, very flexible, where any country could join anytime and any country could exit anytime. So it's basically creating modules. Sorry, there's a flight going overhead. So Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is now starting negotiations, is an attempt to create modules of best practices, taking good practices from all partner countries in certain defined areas like tax evasion and corruption, connectivity, infrastructure, trade facilitation, supply chains. But that's not committing to tariff reduction, which India finds difficult, or market access. So that is why India is now happily part of that. So fundamentally, United States is trying various experiments, whether it can bring any of these countries to form some kind of one or multiple clubs that will treat United States as the world leader. And as the focus shifts to Indo-Pacific, United States will still continue to the world leader. But that's not happening. The relative decline of United States has partly been accelerated by the period of Joe Biden's presidency. Look at one after another crisis inside United States. He is not only the oldest elected president of United States, but least popular right now. 33 to 34% popularity ratings. So his domestic preoccupations. And then, of course, he has still to revive. America is back, he wanted to tell us. But he's trying his level best. But China's influence is not easy to overlook. Especially so because United States is creating all these clubs in Indo-Pacific region, is creating Indo-Pacific narratives to counter China, which I could even say alienate China, restrain China. Why not co-opt China? China is the most powerful regional nation in Indo-Pacific. United States is also the most powerful part of Indo-Pacific. Why can't the two come together in various arrangements? But United States is aware that it does not want to share global stature, stage, and power with Chinese, because their way of thinking is different. The way they operate is different. Their values, procedures, laws, norms are different. Chinese, for example, don't ask any questions about human rights, democracy, and other issues when they go and invest. That is why they are able to invest in many countries. In actual practice, United States was also the most friendly country to several dictators or family rulers. But at least they create this narrative of democracy all the time. So this contestation of not co-opting but countering China makes this region all the more interesting, because each local player becomes much more important for United States to cultivate, assuage, propitiate, to make friends with. And since they have decided that they will not co-opt China, they will counter China in creating various clubs in Indo-Pacific, in creating various narratives. In fact, there are multiple definitions of physically what is Indo-Pacific. Some broader definitions talk of it from eastern coast of Africa to the west coast of American continent. But when Joe Biden created Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, he did not include other neighboring countries, coastal countries of American continent. For example, what about Chile, Peru, Nicaragua, all the way up to Panama, Mexico? They are all coastal countries of Pacific. They are all partners in Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was initiated by United States. Then Donald Trump left it, and Japan revived it. Now it is called Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. And most interesting part is China has applied for its membership now. And some of you will remember that RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, was originally ASEAN initiative. But once China entered into it, China has become now the leader of that. Likewise, if China enters CPTPP, which is Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership of 11 nations, if China is allowed to enter, maybe China will also become leader of that. So imagine in economic networks, in the Indo-Pacific region, China is already being recognized as the leader. Now, because US wants to counter China and not co-opt China in Indo-Pacific, and therefore is creating new narratives, new clubs, new alignments, it sees India as the next largest nation. Many of you know that the multiple projections around the world now more or less agree that by middle of this century, China will become the largest economy of the world, India will be second largest economy of the world, and United States will be the third largest economy of the world, Indonesia possibly the fourth. And European G7 countries and United States understand that that is a possibility, and that's how they are engaging India. You see them now suddenly in love with India. Every leader wants to engage Indian Prime Minister because they see where the future is going. Now, these things could be, these estimates could be delayed a little bit. It could happen 5 years before, it could happen 10 years later. But the trend is in that direction. And therefore, United States, which already has other two big countries, Australia and Japan, as alliance partners, finds India most interesting, most valuable to co-opt as a friend. But India says you cannot dictate terms. You have to listen to India's vision. And therefore, you see, despite all the noise that President Joe Biden has been making for 3+ months now on Ukraine, wherever he goes, even in the recent summit of American nations, he wants to talk about sanctions on Russia. But what happened in the summit meeting in Tokyo? The joint statement does not have the word Ukraine in it. That means United States has to listen to India. And India has been repeatedly saying Quad should not focus on Ukraine crisis. Quad has to focus on Indo-Pacific. Russia is a European problem. It's not Indo-Pacific problem. So gradually United States has to give space, accept, and take what India projects as its vision. And that is where you see India's engagement becomes much more interesting and critical compared to Australia, Japan, who are alliance partners. They will toe the line more or less of whatever United States wants them to do. And they continue to be partners from that perspective of NATO nations or military alliances. India is a new kind of a partner. And therefore, it is important, and I'll take another 5-7 minutes to explain then what is that nuanced understanding of India on Indo-Pacific. I have just mentioned why it is so unique and so critical in determining the future trends of Indo-Pacific, because this is the only country that can perhaps make the difference. China is making huge difference, but China is not being co-opted. it is being countered. So it is going to make difference in the dynamics of Indo-Pacific as a competitor, not as a partner. India can make that difference as a partner. Now, you would remember that soon after becoming the Prime Minister, Indian Prime Minister had visited Seychelles and Maldives and Sri Lanka. And in March 2015 had outlined his vision called Sagar, security and growth for all in the region. Now that continues to more or less define the broader bandwidth of India's Indo-Pacific strategy, where India sees that the world is drifting from continents to oceans, to outer space, to cyberspace. Sometime I had an old friend, Admiral Mihir Roy, God bless his soul, who used to say, if humans knew about their planet, they would not name it Earth. They should have named it water. Because Earth is only 23% of the surface. If you look at the blue planet, as we call it now, from distance, from space, you would not name it Earth, you would name it water. So now, since we are aware of who we are, where we are, and we can access those spaces, increasingly, world has shifted from continents to oceans, whether for leisure, pleasure, tourism, food and fisheries, transportation, raw materials. Think of anything. The whole debate of blue economy, enormous abundance of resources over, in, and under the oceans, has already drifted all countries to think more and more maritime. So India likewise is also thinking maritime, and that is why Prime Minister's first big vision, Sagar, spoke of security and growth for all in the region, which was maritime projection of India's vision. And India is a maritime country. I mean, we were always maritime. Think of 3rd century BC, India's trade going all the way to Chinese coasts, to various Southeast Asian countries, Cholas in 10th century having the world's most influential navy, Maratha navy of 16th century. Then, of course, the merchants, caravans, naval caravans of 16th, 17th century. India was traditionally a great seafaring country, except that when European came, they came from oceans and dominated us. So we became shy of going to the oceans because we saw them as great oceanic powers. And therefore, we got kind of more focused on continents. And they became great naval powers because of Industrial Revolution. Steam engine that created the revolution. That made them great powers because they had fleets. They could go around the world and could fight wars from distance from the oceans and could hide back in the oceans. So here, India traditionally was a seafaring country, and Prime Minister Sagar's speech came as the first major outline. Second outline, as I already told you, came in terms of that Shangri-La dialogue speech of 2018. I have already mentioned that. Later, of course, in the 14th ASEAN Summit, Prime Minister also presented something called Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which exactly the way President Joe Biden has now replicated the model of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative of India says the same thing. It doesn't have to be hardcore membership that some people are in, others are out. It is a flexible arrangement where on different components in different sectors, different set of countries could start working together. But basically to make sure what India is saying, see, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is credited for creating this whole idea of Pacific community, and then of course free and open Indo-Pacific. India adds free, open, and prosperous. See, India's influence, India adds a word. India says free, open, and prosperous. Because free, open limits it to perhaps security, strategic perspective. But when you add prosperity, then it talks the welfare component. So Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative is something that talks about wealth creation. It talks about welfare promotion. It talks about creating win-win strategies where different group of countries within this region, for example, we have 45 countries part of Indian Ocean Rim Association. Then add another 50 countries of the Pacific Ocean, big, small, all. Pacific Islands. In fact, Pacific Islands are becoming the new focus of both India and China and Australia and United States. China recently signed some kind of a military pact with Solomon Islands. So here India is trying to present its vision by creating relatively distinct and different narratives. Narratives that are not limiting themselves to only focusing on denial of access to China that they want to counter. In fact, India has constantly said that China should be also invited into Indo-Pacific narratives, into Indo-Pacific initiatives. Before we got into trouble on the border, India, on India's insistence, had added an item called Indo-Pacific geopolitics on our annual India-China maritime dialogue. India said, let us put one more item for discussion. India sees China is the reality of this region. So you cannot create networks which will facilitate prosperity of this region by excluding and alienating China or alienating any other country. Point is, to some extent, there are other countries who also think likewise, but they are only slowly now encouraged by India's behavior. And the fact that United States is beginning to listen to India, they are also beginning to air some of those ideas. So India is saying that we need not limit our focus to security, physical possession or denial. The aim has to be prosperity. And therefore, we have shifted from non-alignment to multi-alignment, where we are trying to build partnerships in as many sectors, in as many countries as possible. So surprise, surprise, until we got into trouble with Middle East countries, India was a unique country where Israel, but also Iran, Oman, but also Saudi Arabia, all of them were, they don't look, they're not comfortable with each other, but they're all comfortable with India. So that kind of network, which has to be fluid, designed for specific needs of specific time, flexible, but focusing on transparency, accountability, best practices, those are the kind of models India wants to promote in this region. And therefore, interesting is that India is beginning to gain traction, as we say, is beginning to gain certain respectability, because United States sees its compulsion, and so are its other allies, that India is one unusually powerful and potentially most relevant country that has to be partnered. Because if India, let us say it's not possible, but let's be counterintuitive and sort of be devil's advocate. If India and China were to unite, United States ceases to exist as a global power. So imagine Russia, China, India coming together. So it is the compulsion of United States and Western allies to wean India away. The debate these days is to wean India away from Russia and China. And therefore, all kinds of incentives, all kinds of, respecting India's views. The joint statement in Tokyo indeed had a full paragraph on South Asian terrorism. That countries that provide finance, countries that provide sanctuaries, countries that use cross-border terrorism. Now, think of who other country in Quad bothers about these things. Australia, Japan, United States, none of them. So that paragraph was clearly India's paragraph. And Joe Biden's paragraph on Ukraine did not exist there. That shows the kind of leeway that India today has in redefining, realigning how Indo-Pacific gets viewed and how prosperity, not just security, but security is only a step to achieve prosperity. And that is where India's new experiments in engaging new narratives, in engaging multiple countries. And last, Defense Minister has recently come back from Vietnam. Vietnam is another country that is trying to say, let us engage both China and other countries and United States. So Vietnam is saying we are not trying to counter China, even if they had a war with China like India had. And India's defense relationship with Vietnam is now becoming an issue for global debates. India is even going to supply not just small patrol boats, which India has already supplied 12. India is even thinking of supplying bigger ships like corvettes or BrahMos or Akash missiles. Now, obviously, when maritime forces of a country like Vietnam become empowered by Indian defense equipment and they start doing joint production, which is the country that will be worried? China. Because they want to make sure China follows basically norms of international behavior. Philippines is another country where we have signed a contract for BrahMos to be supplied to them. That's a maritime version of BrahMos. It's an anti-ship cruise missile. So basically, India, I would say, not so imperceptibly anymore. One could say it was imperceptibly moving a couple of years before, but now increasingly you see the assertive nature. You see how Indian foreign minister talks now in some of these meetings. He's so firm about India's point of view to be respected. And that kind of new horizon kind of opening for India. And India, of course, being civilizationally grounded and capable of thinking very differently compared to some of these Anglo-Saxon nations. A has now opportunity and space, and B, the capability increasingly, which is getting recognized in contributing to how free, open, and prosperous Indo-Pacific narrative, geopolitics, and equations finally get built. I noticed that, like a teacher, I continued talking far too long. It's just 10 minutes for the hour to finish. And I really wanted to listen to my colleagues from the department and some young students. So let me just abruptly stop here. And I look forward to things that some of you may have to say. Feel free to contradict me. I always welcome that. And in case you have any comments, welcome. Questions, I'll try to answer. Thank you. And back to Ma'am Professor Rao. Floor is yours. Professor Rao, you have to unmute yourself. So maybe we can use this time to allow any of the faculty members. I think the Professor Rao is trying to unmute. Sometimes I understand all of us are on the learning curve and these systems get stuck. So I understand there is some issue there, but maybe Dr. Vaishali Raghuvanshi or some other student or faculty member may have something to contribute.
I think without taking further time, I would first of all thank you, Professor Swaran. I have had the opportunity to listen to you at many times, and this is the first time in the university here in DHU, but I've had the pleasure to listen to you many times in Delhi and several other places. I must say that the simplicity with which you speak about such a complex issue is something which we have to learn as a beginner in the academics and also as a young scholars. I think this is something which is very important. Here, the crowd is of all the PhD students and some of my grad students and postgrad, they all have joined. But I'm very sure that they all have understood the crux of the what, why, and how of the India's role in the Indo-Pacific region per se, and what is the strategy behind this intervention per se. I would definitely, when you were talking about the GSV formation, I remembered when I was teaching a paper on Asia Pacific, and that is something which I was mentioning to all across wherever I was writing and wherever I was speaking, that this is something we need to learn from other countries as well. No doubt that India is standing at the juncture today where we can claim that we are an active member in the international order today. And when the world is changing from unipolar to multipolar, we are an active member and we are trying to seek the position over out there. And also what Hillary Clinton has coined as smart power, that is something which we need to tap on. And you have very aptly mentioned that Japan has provided an example, and then the tiger cubs and the tiger economies have followed the suit, and they have traveled the trajectory of the economic growth. And certainly we need to have certain lessons from there. When we have look east or act east policy to intervene with, to understand with, this is something we are looking for. Especially as a young scholar, I would say that whenever we talk about the hard power, soft power, and the smart power, we have an understanding that a state requires all of them. It's not just the territorial boundaries which are supposed to be kept in line or securitized or desecuritized. Rather, it is also the maritime boundary which matters. And it, as you have mentioned, and I think it is just an innocent remark on that because you have been the authority on the topic, it is that we have started from the maritime. All the trade, all the history, or I would say the history of world trade has started with the maritime. But sadly, as in not sadly, I would say that somewhere it has gone in international relations, it has been at the margins. And recently, with all these initiatives from the governments to actively participate in the maritime discourse and also to reassert the position, we are looking into the ideas like Indo-Pacific region, the Pacific region, and the participation of the great powers like US and China and then India. We are witnessing the global power shift, what other scholars have interpreted in terms of the territorial proximity or the territorial demarcation. So the topic itself, which you spoke, is so timely, and also it has made a point that now the idea is to, especially I'm a scholar from the cultural studies and the intersection between IR and the cultural studies. So I always look from the human perspective to the international relations. But I would say even in the traditional IR, we need to have an understanding of how we can go beyond the statist boundaries. I mean, not even beyond. We need to have the intersection in the statist boundary, and we need to understand that how maritime has a huge role to play in this sense. And the current government is also playing a vital role in terms of making it obvious to the rest of the world. And also, it is not just a one-way process. It is in the domestic realm, in the domestic discussion. Now, I would say that all the more the narratives about the maritime discourse is available to the people who are either the IR enthusiasts or who are avid readers in terms of the national and international politics. And also internationally, as you have mentioned, that the idea has shifted from the discourse of territory to the discourse of maritime. Again, the point which you have mentioned about the Indo-Pacific as economic drivers, as we look into the position of the Indo-Pacific region, we would see that it is curated with the ASEAN countries, and then the involvement of all great powers, a very active involvement of all great powers, prove the fact that it is important, it is of vital importance for us to understand. When I was given the task that you'll be discussing, I was just going through certain articles, and I figured out that many of the institutions have started, and they have been doing it, that now is the time when we have to look into the maritime domain to understand how the regional dynamics and the larger security architecture is being shaped internationally. So it is not just about the national or international, it is also about the regional dynamics. Like you have said, the China's involvement in the region, that is something we need to understand. We need to understand that the way India is participating in the maritime domain, India also has the neighbor next door. I would say, I have to be very politically correct in terms of saying this, the neighbor next door, China, to understand what kind of future challenges are ahead in the journey of India and in terms of the Indo-Pacific. And then also it is becoming, the maritime space is becoming the theater for the geopolitical competition. So there we have a lot of energies coming in, a lot of challenges, a lot of security challenges coming in. So it is not just vital from the terms of the global economic power as a center for the global economic power, but also it is relevant in terms of understanding the security architecture. I would say the international security architecture, and it has been highlighted by Carnegie Institute as well. Many a times they've written about it, and so many other institutes who have highlighted whenever there has been meeting that why it is important to understand China in the Indian Pacific Ocean region, and also the challenges which are lying ahead. So with these things, I think there are certain remarks, which is point A, that we have to understand the historical connection in the Indo-Pacific region. Those who are scholars, those who are trying to understand, as in the research scholars, the established authorities have spoken, like you have spoken today, that it's vital to get into the historical connection and then rekindle those historical connections and try and understand how it can be furthered with the initiatives, with the policies, and with the narratives which all the academia can shape, and hence it can come into the popular consciousness as well. The second point, which is important, like you have mentioned, the question mark over China's role, how we want to see it, as a threat or as a, I would say, as a flip side of the coin, or as a supporter. And the third point, which is there, is that let's not just focus on, like you have mentioned, let's not just focus on the economic power. Let us also see that this region is a potential, has a potential in terms of maintaining the security balance, or it can very well be labeled as a security architecture. So that is what is my take of your lecture today. I'm very fortunate to be here to listen to you. And thank you so much, sir. I now invite if any of our colleague has something to speak on, and then certain scholars are here, they might have certain questions from you. Thank you, sir.
Usually people on my screen, I can notice, I see Priyanka has joined us now. She's also raised hand. So please go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much. I've been listening throughout. There was some glitch in terms of the video, but I managed. I've had the honor of listening to you so many times when I was a student in JNU at CPS. So it's just an honor and delight to listen to this enriching lecture. Though I'm not a scholar of international studies or relations, I'm a theorist. I'm into political thought. You were mentioning some concepts during the lecture, and my question is, in the present sort of foreign policy of the present regime, how much focus is on the civilizational values? Because reading through some of the works of people like Lohia and other people who also had a massive sort of intervention in shaping of India's foreign policy, there was a lot of focus on these civilizational values, especially with regard to the way Japan was invoked in the national movement, and later on being this great sort of force. Concepts like the idea of non-alignment coming from the idea of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, or the Panchsheel that became foundational. Do you see that it still acts as the foundational matrix of how we deploy our reading with regard to relationship foreign policy? Or is it something that is, I will say it, a certain kind of tokenism, because there's also the need to sort of reflect on continuity that this nation has had. So just that, and thank you so much, sir. Very, very enriching. It was really a great joy to listen to you all over again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Priyanka. Nice to see you. And you raised a very pertinent question, because now media is full of debates on 8 years of Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy, and whether culture, diaspora, civilization are being front-loaded now. Let me start with something that we jokingly say. You may have heard that you can take the boy out of the village, but you cannot take village out of the boy. So that's not a choice for a civilizational state like India to drift away from its जड़े हैं सभ्यता के दर्शन दृष्टिकोण में, उससे हटना संभव ही नहीं. So all that happens is that different regimes could become elective or selective as to which component they need to highlight. Obviously, now we are hearing much more of the role of Loya, as you mentioned, Ambedkar, Subhash Bose. But nevertheless, even all these leaders, their visions were also quintessentially Indian visions. And so did Mahatma Gandhi when he wrote Hind Swaraj, or Nehru when he wrote Discovery of India. Yes, each of us, when we interpret who we are, what our nation is, will obviously have a certain selection depending on our limited understanding. So Nehru interpreted that Indian philosophy, Indian vision, Indian civilization in one way, and other leaders also likewise interpreted that and made all of India's foreign policy, all of policies, including foreign policy, to be sort of integrated or grounded in that vision of India. So to me, to answer you like an academic, that's not an option that we can get away or get closer. Indian foreign policy will continue to be grounded, and that's what Indian Foreign Minister today said, that even if you forget civilization and history and freedom movement, we are now the second largest population, fifth or sixth largest economy. In that sense, nuclear weapon power and emerging sort of power in various ways. And that only provides leverages to outline and implement quintessentially Indian vision. So, for example, when any of us get suddenly more money, what we do? We don't do new things. We do things that we always wanted to do in a big manner, in a more influential, more convincing, more nuanced way. That's what India is doing. India's foreign policy has been and will remain grounded in India's civilizational traditions, whether it is Madhyam Marg, or it is Panchsheel, or it is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. They are the central axes that define India's foreign policy. Now, depending on what are the structural challenges, what are the new sudden transformations around, for example, if climate change is the new debate, that could make India briefly sort of tactically redefine its initiatives. But they will still be within that broad bandwidth of civilizational grounding of foreign policy. Let me just cut short here. I see Ankush has opened his video. I don't know if he wants to say something. And Vaishali, if I can take 30 more seconds, I'm happy to know that you said you work from cultural studies in IR, and you mentioned maritime boundaries. And the one thing most interesting I find cultural studies tell us is that boundaries, which in strategic studies are seen as points of division, in cultural studies are seen as point of connect. Boundaries are where nations meet. Boundaries are where nations meet. Boundaries are not where nations separate. So it is how you explain it. हम परिभाषित कैसे करते हैं, वो हमारे अपनी दृष्टिकोण पर तय करता है. So you have strategic studies saying boundaries are dividing lines, cultural studies saying they are connecting lines. That's where nations meet. I was tempted to add that I was happy to also know that you have a very sort of specific focus on cultural studies perspective in IR. Ankush, you wanted to say something, or anybody else wants to say something? I see Dr. Lalji. Is that Dr. Lalji is with us?
There are certain remarks in the section also, sir, in the chat box. If you want me to.
Sure. So you can. Yeah. Sure.
So there's a remark and the question from Palak Singh, and it's stated as, sir, you mentioned that it was difficult for America to kind of tame or co-opt the Asian countries because they were too different culturally. But same issue was there at the time when the Asian countries were subject to the colonial rule. So how would you view the huge impact that America has had in exporting its culture, including the globally dominant capitalist system, to these countries, and to some extent, even, one second, sir. I
think I got the question, and I can try and answer.
To some extent, now. Yes, sir, please. Yeah.
I think thank you to, if I heard you right, Palak Singh. for his question. I think very quick way, if you want to pursue that interest of yours, is to look debates on colonialism and neo-colonialism. In neo-colonialism, as Gramsci says, hegemony by consent. And because democracy has been the flagship of United States, and now 100+ countries are democratic, at least the facade of co-option has to be created. Colonialism was a jackboot policy by force, by wars, by violence. Now nations need to build partnerships, which sometimes could be replication of neo-colonialism, but they should at least create a facade of the sense of equal partnership. There is never any equal partnership in any partnership. But now, because of world being focused on global governance, transparency, accountability, and best practices, at least the facade of equality has to be created, and therefore the trouble for United States. If United States wants to bombard these countries, it would find it relatively easy. Though even that has not been possible because the public opinion goes against United States. It did carpet bombing in Vietnam, but because both domestic public opinion in United States and global opinion was going against United States, it had to accept defeat against North Vietnam and retreat. It has done the same thing in Taliban's case. Taliban has, I call it regime change in reverse. See, last 20 years, George Bush Jr. onwards, US was going out to do regime change. Taliban for the first time has done reverse, regime change in reverse. They've changed the regime propped by United States. So it's not easy for United States in 21st century to even use force. So the difference of colonialism is that at that time, brute force was a possibility. In 21st century, brute force can be tried, but it's not a tool that will deliver any success to any nation, including United States. That is why United States has challenged to co-opt these countries and then sort of create all kinds of flexible arrangements just to make sure that they accept United States as a world leader, and many of them are not accepting. And those who are willing to partner are saying, you must listen to us as much as we listen to you. And India is one great example among those countries. I hope I answered Palak's question. There are some more, chat box has some more things.
Yes, sir. The next question is by Soumya, and she's asking, what are the possible challenges Biden administration can face by giving special attention to India in the Indo-Pacific region?
Obviously, the biggest challenge at home is Republicans, because so far President Biden has been unsuccessfully struggling to come out of President Donald Trump's shadow. He's been trying to mark his own kind of foreign policy, but has not been able to do so. So his biggest problem is how to engage India differently, or how to re-engage the world institutions that Donald Trump was throwing out. He was removing United States from several international arrangements. And now Joe Biden is trying to go back and say, America is back, we want to join. And same applies to India. So even today, despite all the foundational agreements being signed, despite 2+2 arrangement that the United States now has with India, on the ground, technology transfers are not happening. On the ground, trade is still same, stuck around 100, 110, 120, 113 billion dollars. It's not going. It can easily go up to $500 billion. But because of these domestic constraints of America first, jobs being under stress, so even Joe Biden is finding it difficult to change those kind of mood. See, the popular mood that Donald Trump has created in the United States is that the world has been cheating us. World was being not benevolent in engaging United States, and every country was taking advantage of United States. NATO countries were not paying up money. They were just taking benefit from NATO alliance, largely run by United States. And that sentiment of protectionism, of America first, is still very strong in the ground in United States. So now to go up and start making concessions to a country like India is not an easy choice for President Joe Biden. And that's his challenge. I think question was, what is the challenge when dealing with India? That is the challenge with dealing with India, because domestic opinion has been transformed enormously in saying we need to focus crudely only on American interests, and any concessions that are made for India, whether it is in climate change, for example, the climate fund is not created, technology transfers are not happening either for climate or for nuclear power or for defense technologies. And that is the trouble. And that's how India has to go to Israel, India has to go to France, India has to go to other countries to sign other defense contracts, because sometimes the advanced technologies transfer is a sensitive issue, and that continues to be so. Whereas if they want to co-opt India as an equal partner, they have to make these concessions. India is giving some kind of enormous goodwill that India has in Asia, and therefore in return something has to come. In that sense, that is a limitation that Joe Biden continues to have of still being under shadow of Donald Trump. His foreign policy was simply isolationist, more or less. You can also read about 1920s, 30s debate on American isolationism. Raj Hans also has some recent Pew research that shows that people in Southeast Asian countries don't see India as a significant player in balancing. No, reverse actually. ASEAN has all the way from almost late 1980s sought to balance their increasing co-option and friendship with China by engaging India. It is India which has always been enormously reluctant to not to appear as countering China. Even with the United States, India doesn't want to present itself as a country which is joining any alliance to counter China, because we say we are also engaged with China. We will counter China bilaterally. We don't need any regional arrangements to do that. But otherwise, ASEAN is a huge partner with India now in various ASEAN-centric organizations, from ASEAN Forum to East Asia summits. Yes, ASEAN sometimes feels that sentiment that India does not attach same importance to ASEAN that, for example, India attaches to Russia, to China, to Japan, to Australia. Reason being very simple, that India is no longer a least developed country which is part of third world nations and non-alignment group of 77. India is today emerging power, so it wants to align with emerging powers. So when we want to engage with ASEAN, we want to engage with ASEAN 10 together. That's why Prime Minister said, let us invite 10 ASEAN leaders to the Republic Day as chief guests. Not one country. You are together for us as one group. At that level, India can engage you. European Union level, India can engage. For example, recently the President of European Union was to inaugurate Raisina dialogue in Delhi. So India being a large economy now, or particularly potentially very large economy, IMF is saying it's the fastest growing economy now among major economies, sees itself no longer, having time and energy enough to go back to that third world kind of debate, to engage with the least developed countries. We want to do good. India wants to do good things for them. But India's new alignments are with middle powers, emerging economies, BRICS nations. That kind of arrangement means that ASEAN individually may not be significant. ASEAN collective is significant. Indeed, this year is the 30th anniversary of India-ASEAN dialogue. And there are so many events happening. And this month only, I think, yes, few days, 16, 17, all the foreign ministers will be in Delhi for Delhi dialogue. So at collective level, ASEAN matches to India's stature, and at that level, India is willing to engage. So sometimes individual nations have this feeling that India is not, we are not into Bandung conference mindset where, one country, we are fighting for freedom of Indonesia. That kind of thing is now gradually shifting to dealing with ASEAN as a collective. And sometimes some of those nations are nostalgic about those old relationships between Ho Chi Minh and Mahatma Gandhi, or Sukarno and Nehru. That kind of thing is, I think, sometimes makes them feel that we are not giving them enough weightage. But India is giving them enough weightage as a collective, as ASEAN group, and not as individual nations, because as individual nations, they are far too small for India to spend too much time engaging them. I think I was a bit crude in answering this question, but I just want to make sure the point is explained. Then I think next, Aparna Tripathi has a question. As China is rising in Indo-Pacific region, what is the future of Indo-China relations? I think if you were hearing Aparna, I was mentioning that India has a nuanced policy of not alienating China and bandwagoning United States in countering China. India has a nuanced policy of engaging all nations who will wish to engage India, at least in sectors where these countries wish to engage India. So China-India trade is a big element. Chinese investments into India are a big element. China-India stand together on many regional, for example, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or BRICS nations, or Russia, China, India strategic triangle. There are many multilateral forums where India and China work together. And of course, India also participates, and India is a special invitee this month again to G7 meeting, for example, which will focus on countering China. So India has a fairly nuanced approach to foreign policy, and that is simply possible because we are a mosaic kind of a civilization. We are not a singular monolith society like Chinese have become. All Han Chinese, speaking one language, writing one language. We have such variety, such diversity, that we can therefore nuance our understanding of issues very differently than some of the other countries, whether they are Anglo-Saxon Christian countries or it is the communist countries like China. And that advantage India has, and therefore I think India is engaging China at the same time as India is engaging United States. Raj Hans Oja has some question. I would love if you can switch on your videos and ask your questions, and I would get to see who you are.
Vaishali, I also have a question after this.
Please, ma'am, of course, no, let Professor Rao say something.
Yes.
Yes, Professor Rao.
My question is to you, sir, and to Vaishali as well. You said in the beginning that India and China both are civilizational countries, and US is not a civilizational country. In fact, all the Anglo-Saxon countries are the same. They are inferior to India and China civilizationally. But then we can't negate the fact that India and China also don't resemble one another. Rather, they are diametrically opposed to one another in their approach to foreign affairs, in their approach to everything. While China is so belligerent and expansionist, India is accommodating and peace-loving. So what is the reason behind so much of difference between two civilizational countries, as you may say? Is communism the reason why China gets its viewpoint distorted, and the fact that India is a democracy, we are different from them because democracy also has got many traits common with ancient civilization which India has, like accommodation, plurality, tolerance, and peaceful coexistence. So in that way, democracy becomes a synonym for civilizational virtues. But this is an enigma which I want to understand, and that's why I'm asking you and Vaishali as well. She's a cultural scholar of cultural studies. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me quickly say a few things. In your short intervention, you have said so many things. First of all, let me correct if I said that America is not a civilizational country. That was not being very polite. I only mentioned that that's a continuum of Greco-Roman traditions or Anglo-Saxon traditions, which are largely sort of one kind. Just like Indian civilization also has several subsets within. It's not a monolithic civilization. We have several traditions in Indian civilization. Also, similarly, Western civilization goes back to Rome, Greece, and sort of later Germany, France, England. And what I mentioned is that the power elite in United States at least is continuum of that civilization. And each civilization, of course, is distinct. Otherwise, they will be merging into each other. They have survived for millenniums separate because they are definitely different from each other. And the power elite, which is continuing the Greco-Roman tradition in the United States, you see only they call themselves Americans. Others are Black Americans, or they are Mexican Americans, or they are Indian Americans or Asian Americans. The only people who call themselves as Americans are also immigrants. They are not indigenous people there. There's a big movement now, for example, in the United States, in Australia, in Canada, about indigenous people. Maybe Vaishali will know more about those things. So they are also continuing certain kind of civilization, but they are distinct from Indian civilization. And that answers partly your question, that Chinese civilization also then is distinct from Indian civilization. Of course, Buddhism works sometime as a big bridge
Yes.
between Indian and Chinese civilizations. And there are a lot of, again, Buddhism has whole range of, Buddhism in Tibet is different from Buddhism in Thailand, Buddhism in Myanmar and Sri Lanka are different. So in that sense, even subsets of civilization, depending on their changing locations, evolve different trajectories. But to come to your quick question as to why are they, I wouldn't see diametrically opposite, but yes, they are distinct from each other. China and India are distinct from each other. I wouldn't simplify to say India is all good and China is all bad. We are all peace loving and they are all war loving. That will be rather simplification of the equation. But I would say they're distinct for sure. And when they're distinct, they, as I was saying earlier, are selective in what part of their heritage they want to highlight. Now, obviously, China is highlighting its ancient tradition. Confucianism, for example, Sun Tzu, for example, are great philosophers of China which are being front-loaded in their narratives. They want to, even Mao used to talk about Confucianism, talk about Sun Tzu, and that is what China is now trying to say, that we are a civilizational state, this is our inheritance, and our current policies are driven by our inheritance. But each time a power elite interprets its own heritage, we are all selective. Individually also we are selective. In fact, our memories are selective. Eyes only see the front side, I can't see my rear. So biologically, I am limited as to what do I perceive. So I don't perceive 360 reality. I perceive at best 260-degree reality around me biologically. Then my brain again selects certain information that I see. Not every information I receive, not every observation I have stays with me. Only few things stay with me. So even the very creation of civilization is selective. And then interpretation every time of that civilization historically, that is why we keep rewriting history again and again. Otherwise, we don't have to rewrite history every time, because every next generation either finds some kind of new revelations of documentation or monuments or unearths some other material, and therefore history gets rewritten again. And of course, I would say there is definitely certain political tinge in when interpretations are done. So I'm sure communism in China has a role to play as to how leaders in China have interpreted their heritage or how they have conducted themselves in global affairs, because they were partly atheists. Communists were atheists. But just like the communists have adopted to free market economy, they have also adopted to religion now. The fastest growing Christianity is in China. The largest country, Buddhist country in the world with 400 million people believing in Buddhism is China. So obviously, over years, China's communism is no longer following the original template of stateless, classless society, class struggle, the methodology, relations of production explain social relations, nothing of that kind. They are a free market economy where bulk of people believe in social values, believe in religions, and they follow those practices, sir. So in that sense, Chinese have also over a period of time transformed themselves. But yes, since the spokespersons, since the interpreters of who we are and what we want to do are politicians, definitely they have their own selection to make. And that selection sometimes doesn't go well with academics, at least with certain academics. So that is an issue in any country, not only in China. Sorry, Vishali had to add, I realized suddenly that I talk too much. Let me just abruptly stop again. I hope I answered Professor Rao's inquiry.
Yes.
As Professor Swaran has mentioned, ma'am, I would see a larger role of the perception and also the popular consciousness. Sir has mentioned about rewriting the history. The way we have been seeing the civilization, I see that has always been unidimensional. If we know the Mandarin as a language and if we can read the text in Mandarin, we would know that how much convergence and divergence are there and how their scholars have interpreted it, especially in terms of the Buddhist literature. There is an initiative by China, which everyone would know here, that establishing a cultural embassy in Southeast Asian countries. If we go there, the largest focus is on the religion, how we can connect all the countries to the source of religion. And that is something which I see as the twist in terms of opportunity. Like Sir has talked about crony capitalism. Capitalism has been tweaked and it has been made as crony capitalism now. Even the cultural affiliations, or I would say civilization, is being tweaked now. And now the idea is of, we have Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and they have the idea of bringing everyone under one umbrella, where China can lead the path, like it is happening in the trade in terms of BRI and other initiatives. So it is just the perception. Even Indian scholars have mentioned it quite a number of times, that like Sir was saying, that we don't have to just see that how they are opposite to each other. Rather, we also have to see what are the ways in terms of the convergence. So Buddhism stands as the biggest point of convergence. And certainly we know that civilization is a product of science, technology, governance, and also the human consciousness. And human consciousness have a lot of sources to get constructed and to get deconstructed. And that is something what you have pointed has been constructed over the period of time and in a very unidirectional manner. I am not somebody who is a scholar over the China's cultural studies or into the, I've not known the Mandarin as well, but as I have been understanding from the cultural studies point of view, that there are many initiatives which are being done to bring all the Asian countries together as opposed to US. Because US pop culture has influenced, or US cultural sites have influenced the youngsters. I'm sure those who are here, I'll give an example of basically the soap opera Game of Thrones. Everyone has seen it. There is a very famous book on Game of Thrones and international relations. And it shows that how two dynasties have different point of view, how they come from different civilization, but they all have one quest. That is hunger for power, as in to become the superpower or to have more power. That is how I interpret the quest of India and China, by taking all the dynamics which we have to get that position. So I agree. I second with each and every thought what Sir has mentioned, and this is something which I had to add on to. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. So is that all for today? I think we can. It's nice to see Vaishali again. Nice to see that you have joined the department now here.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Professor Rao is again, I think, trying to unmute herself. Our systems sometimes play tricks upon us. It's fine now. We can again. You were unmuted again. It's okay now.
So I think there are no questions now, Vaishali.
Yes.
Dr. Vaishali. So shall we end?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for everyone to join here, and thank you. I must say, ma'am, thank you for organizing these lectures. We get the time to have a focused discussion, and also this issue has been very timely. One of the research scholars, I'm sure many research scholars are working on the maritime studies, and they would have benefited immensely to know the topic and also to know Sir's specialization. This is a great way to interact, and COVID has taken a lot of things from us, but has given one thing, which is to connect across the border, across the boundaries. So I would thank you for organizing. Thank you all the department colleagues here for being present, and all the research scholars. And I can see Professor Jha, sir. Thank you, sir, for being here. And all the more, Professor Swaran, for taking your precious time out for the department, for all of us. It has been a wonderful session. Hoping to hear you soon, in person, virtual, wherever possible. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, and especially Professor Rao. Thank you so much for approaching me for this talk. And I'm happy to connect with you again. So let's keep in touch.
Thank you. And I just want to add one thing for everybody's this thing, that what the takeaway that I have arrived at is that more than foreign policy study, this cultural study has got more weight, and on that we should pay attention, and we should really try our wits at understanding this cultural factor, which is there becoming so important in the South Indo-Pacific region. So this should be our project, I think, another major project with us. Thank you.
I agree with you. I agree. I think Vaishali has more work than
Ah,
more work to do.
no, yes. And
Thank
we
you,
should-
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.